This show is brought to you by Drift Outfitters in Toronto at 199 Queen Street East. Drift is remaining open during these difficult times, but with a new way of getting you your fly fishing goods without allowing customers into the shop. Visit them online at driftoutfitters.com to order products and take advantage of free shipping across Canada on orders over $100. Why not help them out during this difficult time for small businesses? Give them a shout out on Instagram. Got a great photo to share? Tag at Drift Outfitters. Also, you can tag your fly tying pics with hashtag self-isolation to show your friends and your followers how you're spending your downtime. Giving Drift more exposure and love right now is one way we can help keep them going. These are tough times, and we must find a way to continue supporting our community store. Visit driftoutfitters.com for more information. Hello and welcome to another episode of So Fly. It is March, middle of March, end of March actually. We're back online talking today over Zoom again, still in isolation. My name is Mitch. We've got Aldo.
Hello.
We've got Yelma.
Hey everyone.
And we're talking with a very special guest today. We're talking with an author, a journalist, a fly angler, a playwright, Mark Kurlansky, today about his book Salmon: A Fish, the Earth, and the History of Their Common Fate. Mark, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, as good as we can be during these very strange times.
Very strange, yes.
Yeah, strange is a good word.
Whereabouts are you calling from today?
Manhattan.
Oh, awesome. How's the mood down there? It must be kind of an interesting place.
I wouldn't know. I never see anyone.
Yeah,
Streets are empty.
That's a very good point. Well, Mark, thanks for joining us today, and also thanks for joining us over video chat. Before we get talking about fish at all, I just want to start with, we did a little bit of reading about yourself on your website and found that you were a playwright. What's your favorite play?
Oh, my God.
Just kick it off with one of those questions. Just a tough question to kick things off,
Oh, very hard to say off the top of my head. I'm a great admirer of the Czech playwrights. Eugene O'Neill is not bad.
Yeah, you have a very interesting background. I mean, we saw that you've worked a whole bunch of jobs, including playwright, which was so cool. But you've worked as a commercial fisherman, a pastry chef, a dock worker. Is that right?
Yes. A lot of this has to do with the fact that when I was a playwright, which I don't really do anymore,
yep.
You don't make much money. So you have to do something else.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, well, before we get talking about your book today, you are a fly fisher yourself, right?
I am. I come from New England, and I grew up surf casting.
Oh, nice.
And not fly fishing. Fly fishing was something I just thought rich people from somewhere else did.
Yeah.
And, it was just surf casting, stripers and blues. But, the thing about surf casting is it really gets you into casting.
Yeah.
And then, I discovered in my early 20s that, the ultimate in casting was fly fishing.
Yeah.
Right.
Surf casting is an interesting. What kind of species were you going for there?
Oh, in New England, it's just mainly stripers and blues.
That's cool.
Right.
Oh, striped bass would be so much fun. Do you remember the first fish that you ever caught on the fly rod?
And a fly rod. I do remember the first fish I ever caught on a fly rod was a very small brown trout in Scotland. I actually think it might have been a par.
Oh, wow.
Let it go.
That's an amazing first fish to catch on a fly rod.
Really good.
Did you learn how to fly fish in Scotland, or was that stateside?
Well, learning to fly fish is a process.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I learn a little bit every time I go fishing. I started in upstate New York, and then I moved to Europe, and I did fly fishing in Scotland and in Basque Country. And I think that I've really learned the most from out west, Idaho.
Mm.
Well, fly fishing, like you say, every time you go out, it's a different time to learn something new. But why don't we jump over to sort of your job as a commercial fisherman? How did you find yourself working as a commercial fisherman?
Well, for reasons nobody in my family understood, I just always had a thing about fishing. My father was a dentist, nobody in my family was particularly into fishing. And I was, and I had a friend in high school who said he knew a guy who was a commercial fisherman. Who might be looking for somebody for the summer, and I contacted him, and he was, and it was a 45-foot wooden hulled boat built in Bath, Maine. We went out in open ocean, way out in open ocean for lobsters under, more than 200 feet of water, 200 feet of line. So he wasn't really looking for skill. I was sort of a big guy who could haul 200 feet of line, and that was my job.
What was the first kind of impression that you had when you were working on the boat? Like, I mean, if you go from not being a commercial fisherman to being a commercial fisherman, was it challenging?
Well, it was very challenging at first because, on that kind of a boat, it really rolls a lot in open ocean.
Yeah.
So it took several days before I could figure out how to stand up.
Yeah.
And, once you get those kind of sea legs, I can stand on any deck anywhere now.
Right.
But that was sort of tough.
Yeah.
On the other hand, seeing daybreak at sea, in a purple sky is the most glorious experience.
Oh man, I can imagine.
I loved being at sea, and I remember when we'd come into port, I'd think, oh, look at all those poor suckers who have been stuck on land.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
I can imagine how nice that would be to. I've always dreamt of being a fisherman, but commercial fisherman. But I think I wouldn't last very long on the boats. I'm pretty soft.
I love commercial fishing. I do whenever I can talk somebody into it. I went out with a couple of commercial fishermen in Alaska for my salmon book.
Yes.
Great experiences.
Yes.
I don't know if it was great for them, but it was great for me.
Well, okay. So how do we jump into the story then of how you got into writing this book about salmon at all? I guess what interested you in the first place about writing in such in-depth book about salmon?
Well, in 1997, I came out with a book about cod.
Mm-hmm.
And this was at a time when the northern stock had collapsed on the Grand Banks. This greatest calamity in commercial fishing ever seen. And people, general public, for the first time started thinking about issues of fishery management and overfishing. And I say the general public, because in the 1960s, when I was working with commercial fishermen, they were talking about this all the time.
Right.
But people sort of stayed on this idea and, talk a lot about it. And, monitoring fisheries over the years, it's occurred to me that this is not really all that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in a fishery today, if your only problem was overfishing, that would be a wonderful, simple problem. Just regulate the fishing, problem solved.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's far more complicated. You have to ask why well-maintained fisheries are having diminishing stocks.
Mm-hmm.
Why, for example, salmon in the Atlantic, there's hardly any commercial fishing of salmon in the Atlantic anymore, and yet salmon stocks keep diminishing.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was time that we really faced up to the other problems that fishing is facing. And salmon was the perfect fish to do this on, because being anadromous, living both in the river and at sea, it gets hit by everything we do wrong.
Yeah.
And, so salmon are suffering from the building of dams, but also from pollution and pesticides and bad farming practices and urban sprawl. I mean, building suburbs on riverbanks is a disaster.
Yes.
And deforestation and climate change and climate change and climate change. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to face up to. And it actually, it occurred to me that really, if we want to save salmon, what we have to do is save the earth.
Right.
Yeah,
it's all connected, right? I mean, because like you say, like the salmon are being influenced by all of these things that humans are doing. So it's a hand in hand, right?
Right. It's amazing. Almost everything bad that we do is killing salmon.
Yeah. Jeez. Okay. Well, I guess to start at the beginning, how did you find yourself on a dock in Dillingham, Alaska, with Olson? Why Dillingham? Why Alaska?
Why did I go to Dillingham? I had gone to Dillingham the year before to talk to some people in the salmon business. And this guy, Ole Olson, pulled up in his aluminum skiff.
Yeah.
And he was a very affable, sort of rough-hewn kind of guy, and I got along well with him. And he said, "Oh, you ought to come fishing with me." And I said, "You know what? I will next year." He said, Yeah. I don't think he ever expected to see me again. The next year I showed up and said, "I'm ready."
That's awesome. That's so funny. And he was just more than welcoming, more than willing to take you out.
Yeah, he was like a warm-hearted guy. And, he had sort of a funny operation because he was by trade, he was a sheep shearer in Montana, which I don't know if you've ever seen sheep shearing, but that's a kind of a tough business also.
God. Yeah, absolutely.
Wrestling with these animals.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to picture this man's life where he shears sheep for most of the year and then on his off time spends it in Alaska wrangling not only salmon, but also it seems like a very green crew, as you put it.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what he did was he would get a bunch of guys from Montana who, like never been on a boat before, and he talked them into going up there. And the money they earned, which was, a few $1,000s for the summer, not huge, but where they lived in Montana, they could never accumulate at one time that kind of money. Most of them went back and put a down payment on a house.
Yeah.
But these guys, they didn't know what they were doing at all. Ole would shout, "Okay, go to the stern." The guy would look around and I go,
I love that. That's so funny.
It sounds like me.
I mean, you do paint a pretty beautiful picture, of going out in the ocean, wrangling salmon, and then coming back to a cabin with fresh baked bread, and it is quite romantic. I mean,
in a way,
yeah.
I'll tell you, you have these openers because the people regulating the fishery, salmon is actually a relatively easy fish to manage because they have such a exact life cycle. We know where they are and what they're doing at all times.
Yeah.
So this is Bristol Bay, and they monitor the salmon that come in. And when enough salmon have come in, they'll say, "Okay, guys, you can go out there for the next, say, 15 hours, sometimes 10 hours, sometimes 20 hours. However long it is, you just fish nonstop for that period."
Yeah.
And this is Alaska in the summer, so there's no nighttime. Actually, there is a nighttime. It's kind of beautiful, but it's not dark. It's
right.
Both the sun and the moon are out, and it's just incredibly beautiful.
Wow.
But hauling net after net gets kind of tough. So when you got in to the cabin, Ollie's wife, who he always correctly said was a saint, but the whole time we were out fishing, she was in baking.
Yeah.
So we'd come up, there'd be, fresh breads and pies and all of this stuff. Because, it's that kind of exhaustion where you can't go to bed and sleep.
Yeah.
You're just too tired for that, so you have to somehow unwind.
Yeah.
Eat some pie.
Yeah. God, that sounds amazing. I know the way you described smelling like fish in the ocean coming off of the from a day of fishing and all the baked bread, and also you put the beer bread recipe in there, and I got to try to make that.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I always add recipes. I love recipes.
So good. So good.
So Was Bristol Bay kind of the jump off point for your research, or I mean, aside from like a lifelong of fishing yourself?
I don't remember. I made a decision that Alaska would be my jumping off point for the book.
Right.
I don't know if it was. I don't remember if it was the first place I went, because I went there several times.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
But there really are only two viable salmon fisheries in the world: Alaska and the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, which I also went to later on. So it made sense. I wanted to start, in a place that was working. So I talked about. I went out with a couple people. Two people, you could not have two people who were so completely different. And it kind of showed the difference between set netting and drift netting. Because one is much more expensive. You got a more expensive boat. The other one, you're just in this little aluminum skiff. And one fishery, I mean, Ollie and those guys, they were pulling the things out of the net and stepping on them. They were throwing them all on the deck and stepping on them. And then they'd go to the tenders and they'd shove them all in these canvas bags and they'd take them away. When I was out in Copper River, actually fishing the Gulf of Alaska, but this was Copper River salmon, on a really nice one-person boat with a spool in the back for hauling the net. And this incredible woman, Thea Thomas, who I had known from previous trips to Alaska. And she was very hesitant about taking me on board because she had taken people before and they'd gotten seasick.
Right.
Because it gets rough out at the Gulf of Alaska. But I told her that I spent my youth fishing in the North Atlantic. So she said, "Okay, you can come." And but it was, we'd haul in the sockeye and she would bleed them one by one, yank them from the gills and bleed them, and I'd slide them into this hold of ice so they would be iced, and take really careful care of them. And double the value of the fish.
Yeah. So you talked about how salmon and the earth are like so connected, and they're a good way to kind of see how we're mistreating global warming and climate change. What are some of the connections between salmon and humans and the earth?
Well, I mean, to begin with, just the settling of salmon country. I mean, why are Alaska and the Kamchatka the two best salmon places left? Because hardly anybody lives there.
Right.
Because the growing seasons are too short for agriculture. To start with, urbanization and farming are bad for salmon. And anything that clears riverbanks, a salmon river needs to have a forested bank. It needs to have the insect life on the bank because they're insectivores, and it needs to have the nutrition that the trees put into the water, and big old growth trees that fall into the water and create, if you're a fly fisherman, you know that salmonids need pools and fast running water and slow running water in these fallen trees that create that. Nowadays in Washington state, they're artificially building these things to replace what's gone.
Yeah.
But, so all of this kind of life hurts the salmon, and clearing trees, forestry, but also, for building things and building towns, or this urge that people have, to have a home. It's nice to have a home on the river.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody has a home on the river, it's going to ruin the river.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes sense that urbanization and just development are things that are kind of hurting salmon. Do you think?
But also, damming.
Damming is a big one, yeah.
Obviously, blocking rivers is devastating because salmon have to get up to their spawning grounds.
Yeah.
And When I was putting this story together, I looked at the whole history going back to ancient times, and there were certain things that kept turning up, like, the blocking of rivers being a problem. And there were constantly laws against blocking rivers. Even the Magna Carta actually specifies that the King of England can't block salmon rivers.
Wow.
But, these things were done. And I looked at this history and look at England, how in the Industrial Revolution, England built all these dams to power factories, and the factories dumped pollution into the water. And before long, these rivers were completely dead. Yeah. And then British people went to New England and did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And then, wouldn't you know, it was New Englanders who went to the Pacific Northwest with this great idea of building hydroelectric energy so that they could develop the economy of the Northwest.
Yeah.
And I looked at all this and I thought, why aren't these people learning anything?
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized, because they're not trying to learn anything, because they're not unhappy.
Right.
They are accomplishing what they're trying to do. England became the greatest industrial power in the world. New England became the industrial center of North America.
Right.
In the Pacific Northwest, they by creating energy, they turned a place that had very little economic activity into an economic powerhouse. Biggest energy production, I think, in the world, certainly in North America. They were achieving what they wanted to achieve. And then I realized it's what we're trying to achieve that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's our whole idea of economic development that's wrong. And what's the proof of it? The proof of it is that when in times of economic depression, carbon emissions go down.
Right.
And in times of economic prosperity, carbon emissions go up. Or if you look at what's happening now with the virus,
exactly.
I hate to say it, but this is really good for carbon emissions. They're way down.
Oh, yeah.
I was seeing pictures of Manila pre and during the virus, and the pollution is much less.
Oh, yeah.
Much less. Yeah.
Yeah. Because all of the things we're doing that we call economic development are destroying the world. And we have to think in terms of economic development as something non-destructive that you can do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, particularly in the Republican Party, who put out this idea that there's a conflict between, economic development and taking care of the environment, and that,
right.
being careful of the environment, taking care of the environment means losing jobs. This is it's a false conundrum.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says that economic development has to mean destroying the earth, or that taking care of the earth means you can't have economic activity.
Right.
You just have to do it right.
Yeah. There should be like a harmonious way of implementing this,
Right. When European Americans came to North America and they saw these Native Americans who had societies completely based on salmon, and they noticed that in spite of the fact that they were so completely based on salmon, unlike them, their salmon stocks were not diminishing. So they had to figure out why it just was not worth considering that they were doing something better, because everybody knows that white people are smarter. So they came up with these ideas that the Indians didn't have trade and commerce, so they were only fishing for food, and B, they didn't have enough fishing skills to overfish. Both of those things are completely wrong. Natives built villages and they traded from one village to another, and salmon was a major commodity of trade. And they were extremely skillful salmon fishermen. So that if you read the journals of Lewis and Clark and Mackenzie and all the early explorers, if they needed salmon to eat, they would go to the Indians because they were the ones who knew how to catch it.
Yeah.
But what was different about Native Americans is that the founding principle of their economic activity, which was chiefly fishing for salmon, was that you can't damage the habitat.
Yeah.
You have to take care of the river.
Right.
So I guess then, do you think that overfishing, because that's certainly not like a native thing, overfishing, right? Because they had those practices in place.
Right.
Why is it that overfishing, is it greed that leads to overfishing from commercial fishermen?
Well, first of all, I never liked the word greed used for fishermen. Fishermen work so hard and earn so little money
It's true.
that you can never really call it greed.
That's a good point.
It's a struggle to survive, a struggle to earn a living.
Yeah.
And actually, the solution for commercial fishing is for fish to be more expensive.
Right.
Um,
It's really not overfishing then that's the problem when it comes to salmon populations.
Well, it's not for salmon at all. There's very little overfishing of salmon anymore. I mean, the few places with viable fisheries are doing it very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, there was overfishing. There was, fishermen who put nets across rivers,
Yeah.
all kinds of bad things. But this was, this has really step by step been done away with. As I said, for Atlantic salmon, most of the fisheries have been completely closed down.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You talk in your book about Indigenous people speaking about catch and release as being disrespectful because they see it as like you eat.
It's an interesting point to catch a fish just for the fun of it if you're not going to eat it.
Yeah,
seems to Native Americans as being very disrespectful.
Right.
This troubles me, but I keep doing it anyway.
I know.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
I see their point.
Yeah.
But of course, their alternative. They live in a world where they catch salmon to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And they salt it or dry it or smoke it, preserve it to eat throughout the year, and it's their food supply.
Yeah, exactly.
If we all did that, that would be a problem.
Yes, for sure. So, okay, then what are your thoughts on, I guess, catch and release? I know as an angler, this is a question that I've thought about too. Like, it is kind of like, exactly, when you start thinking about it, it's kind of strange that we hook these fish just for fun and we put them back. I mean, to the point of...
Yeah, and I think that this whole debate over whether the hook hurts the fish is sort of bogus because...
It obviously does.
It probably does. But even if it didn't, being yanked by the mouth through the water would probably be kind of stressful. Not a good experience.
Totally.
I mean, when I release a trout, I always say, and let that be a lesson.
Yeah.
And it is actually, you find that you can tell how many fly fishermen have been in a stretch of water you're fishing by the savvy of the fish.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, big time. Just so picky. They're so used to the flies that enter the water after.
Yeah, so some of the rivers in New England are like that, like the Dardanelle. On the other hand, when you fish in the Kamchatka, where there hasn't been anybody, these guys will go for anything.
Exactly.
It's really the biggest decision you have on fly selection is, do you want a light colored one or a dark colored one?
Totally.
And, it's like if you're fishing a fly for half an hour and you haven't caught a fish, they just switch to a darker one or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing about, thinking about the stress of the fish and how it's, there is obviously stress in the fish. Do you find a need for yourself to justify fly fishing and catch and release? Like, do you ever talk yourself into it or think around that point?
Well, I kind of favor barbless hooks for one thing. So at least you don't hurt them that much when you take the hook out.
Yeah.
Of course, the thing with barbless hooks is that it's easier for them to get unhooked.
Yeah.
So that's okay because the whole idea of fly fishing is to like set everything against you, so there's more of a challenge. But where I hesitate is on Atlantic salmon because I got to tell you, you hook an Atlantic salmon, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
And you don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Anything you need.
I hear that.
It's also the most incredible fish
Yeah.
on your line. There's no experience like having an Atlantic salmon on your line.
There's only been one of us that have has witnessed that miracle, and that's all.
Which one of us was that?
I was in that Gas Bay this last fall, and that was the first was the first experience for me, and yeah, I'd have to agree completely.
There's just nothing like an Atlantic salmon. I mean, just the fury of this wild animal on your line.
Yeah, and it jumps. It's the salmon salar.
It does jump,
yeah, like crazy. It was pretty, when it's interesting, like the Pacific Atlantic comparisons, when you're noting fish stocks about the Atlantic being like, I think you said there's like 1.5 million
correct,
or something.
And then in the Atlantic, and in a good year, you get 60 million sockeye running into Bristol Bay.
That's an incredible amount of fish.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's wild. What do you see as, I mean, you were a commercial fisherman, fond of commercial fishing and fond of fly fishing. It seems like there's two camps there. Do you see a way in which those two communities can maybe start getting along? Quit.
Well, it's an interesting thing because, when I was fishing in New England, fishermen used to talk a lot about the sports fishermen, and they had a conspiracy. They wanted to have the fish all to themselves and, cut out commercial fishermen, keep cutting down their takes so that they could have it all to fish. And this is completely bogus because they were fishing for cod and halibut and haddock, and these are not fish that sports fishermen love. I mean, if you get a cod on your line, the excitement is over. It's just heavy duty to hauling it up. There's no fight, nothing. So these are not sporting fish. But with salmon, which is rightfully the most beloved sporting fish, there is a real issue there.
Yeah.
And in fact, sport fishermen are winning out over commercial fishermen. The maritime provinces and Scotland and Ireland and all these places have discovered, Norway, that there is more money in having an attractive sports fishing industry than in having a commercial industry.
Yeah.
And sports fishing actually in the Atlantic for salmon is replacing commercial fishing.
Right.
As far as getting along, I mean, what you have here is a class problem. It's fishermen see themselves as blue collar working people, and sports fishermen. I know a lot of blue collar sports fishermen. I mean, when I started fishing in New England, we were all blue collar. It wasn't. The fly fishermen were fancy people, but the surf casters weren't.
Yeah.
So this is not, a completely realistic thing, but it is a societal thing that, it's inevitable that, the commercial fishermen are going to look on sports fishermen as, fancy rich people.
Yeah. Do you have any salmon stories that stand out as particularly memorable from any of the salmon you've caught over the years, be it Atlantic or Pacific?
Well, the best stories are the ones you didn't catch.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
Yeah. And a bunch of those.
That's I love this story. I was fishing in the Blackwater River in County Cork, Ireland, famous salmon river.
Yeah.
And I was fishing with a woman named Glenda Powell, who's reputedly the best caster in Ireland.
Yeah.
Amazing that a woman would have this standing, but she won all the casting competitions, and she's a great fisher. And so I was fishing with her, and we weren't catching anything. I caught one brown trout, but we weren't catching any salmon. And so I decided to take a break and do some fly tying with her husband and along the bank. And she said, well, I know a spot. I'm going to go and bring back a salmon. So we tied a few flies, and she came back. And where are your fish, Glenda? She didn't catch anything. And her husband said, all right, Mark, you fish Glenda to a draw.
Amazing.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, it is a good way. I like that.
Glenda sounds really cool too. The way you described her in your book, she sounds like quite the character.
Yeah, she was great.
Oh, that's Ireland must be one heck of a place to go fishing for sure.
Oh, Ireland it's wonderful. They have these great rivers, and the great thing about fly fishing in Ireland is it is so ingrained in the culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the same for
From the-
Scotland?
In Scotland, yes.
Yeah, same with
Yeah.
okay.
You know, in Ireland, when you land at the airport and the custom or passport guy says, so what are you doing in Ireland? You say, I'm fishing. He just smiles.
That's great.
I love it. That's so good. Yeah, Scotland, Ireland. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly like some really great fly fishing culture has come from those places.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is part of the culture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just jumping back over to some of the problems facing salmon for a second. Hatcheries are obviously a problem. They present problems, but it seems that salmon farming does as well, and all the different variations of salmon farming. Do you think there's an end to this kind of mass consumption of salmon? Like, should there be an end to this sort of thing?
I think it's a positive thing. It's providing an inexpensive protein from the ocean.
Yeah.
And we need this. It's causing a lot of problems, and they need to fix them. And they know that. I've spent a lot of time talking to fish farming companies. They're well aware of these problems. They're trying to fix them. They've made some progress on some of them.
Yeah.
But having taken on environmental issues for my whole writing life, which I'm not even going to tell you how many decades that is, but for a while now. And, one thing I've come to think about environmentalism is that calling for a ban of something is a last resort. That really what we should be trying to do most of the time is saying, you're doing this wrong and you have to fix it.
Right.
Even mining companies, rather than saying you can't open the mine, and I've been campaigning with everybody else for years to stop them opening the Pebble mine. The other alternative would be to say, okay, if you're going to have the mine, you have to do it right, because the way you're doing it now is wrong.
Right.
I was thinking what the CEO of one of the big fish farming companies in Scotland said to me. He said, I talk to environmentalists all the time. And he did. I knew many people who had talked to him. He said, but if I get a guy whose only point of view is to stop fish farming, we don't have anything to say to each other.
Right.
It's really a dialogue killer.
Yeah, because there's no place forward on that. I mean, at least like we know fish farming is going to take place. And like you're saying now, it's not a bad thing. It's how we do it that really needs to be addressed.
Right, and there are all these problems that have to be fixed. So that's what I would like to see, is I see fish farming fixed.
Yeah.
The Ori Knudsen, who I dedicated my book to, was this role model for environmentalism, really. This Icelander came from a fishing family and went around the North Atlantic buying out fisheries, raised money for it and bought out fisheries, and it really knew how to talk to people and understand them. And he said to me one time, he said, if it wasn't for fish farming, I wouldn't have been able to do this. Because what happens, you take a country like Scotland, there's no commercial fishing of salmon anymore. But people in Scotland are accustomed to eating salmon very regularly, and they're eating farm salmon.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it acceptable to them not to have commercial fishing anymore. And you go to a market in Scotland, it's not like here where you have the farm salmon and the wild salmon. It's just salmon, and it's all farmed. But nobody's even asking the question. Yeah.
So they figured out a way to kind of balance out those things then.
Yeah, I mean if we're going to restrict and shut down commercial salmon fishing, but there is a way of providing, and you can argue that it's not as good. I think it's not as good. I would much rather eat a wild salmon.
Yeah.
But this interesting thing is happening, that happened with meat. It used to be like in America before the Civil War, everybody ate game.
Yeah.
And they started eating domestic meat, and it was fattier and it was milder tasting. And today, most people actually would rather have a good steak than venison or some wild game, which they say tastes gamey.
Yeah.
you want from game.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The same thing I've noticed is starting to happen with fish. I've had many people say to me that they prefer farm salmon to wild salmon because it's milder tasting and fattier.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. I mean, but
yeah.
do you see, like, I mean, yeah, it's tough, right? Because you can't have that kind of fishery. We're learning commercially a wild fishery.
Well, we do have some of them that are viable.
Yeah.
In this country, it's almost all from Alaska.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, Washington State consider themselves to be great salmon people, but you know, they're eating the same salmon that I'm eating in New York.
Yeah.
Which is frozen shipped from Alaska.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there certainly are some problems facing the Alaska wild fishery, though. Pebble Mine, I know, was a big one for a long time. Is that still an issue that's going on?
Yes, it's very scary. We just about had that beat, and then a couple of things happened.
Yeah.
Donald Trump got elected.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the EPA. And there was a change in governors in Alaska. The last governor opposed it. The current governor supports it. So it's looking kind of tough right now, but a really dangerous thing. I mean, why?
Yeah.
This is what I don't understand. It's okay. So you want to have this mine on, you know, the shores of the largest sockeye run in the world. Don't you have to make sure that the mine is safe?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the argument. You know, the one side is saying it's not safe, don't put it there. The other side is saying the hell with it, we're putting it there.
Right.
Why isn't somebody saying make it safe if you're going to put it there?
Yeah, it's wacky. That's true. I mean, to your point about, like, we're not going to get rid of mines, we're not going to get rid of these things, so we just have to figure out a way for them to coexist and make sense. Yeah, right. Why isn't somebody saying that?
Right. But there are viable fisheries that and they do have, you know, they do have problems from time to time. I mean, farm salmon is a threat to wild salmon. Attracts sea lice for one thing, and there's, you know, the salmon escape. Now, most farm salmon are Atlantic salmon, and people don't understand this. They get very upset when they escape in the Pacific, but actually nothing happens because the wild salmon are a different genus, and it's a pretty hard, fast rule in biology that different genuses don't mate.
Yeah.
So all escaped wild salmon in the Pacific can do is set up their own colony, and they can't compete because, you know, they don't have the skill of wild fish. But that's the problem in the Atlantic. So these fish escape and they mate with wild Atlantic salmon. And, you know, once you start farming an animal, natural selection's out the window. Then you get human selection. You know, cows, dairy cows are a complete product of human selection. Yeah. So are farm salmon. And what they've been selected for is to grow fast.
Right.
And they have no survival skills. They couldn't return to the river of their birth if they had one, which they don't. And they don't know how to do anything. They're just a fast-growing, dumb fish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you don't want to have these crossbreeding with wild salmon because then they'll start becoming dumb also.
Yeah, that would not be good. I mean, maybe for our fishing abilities, it might be good, but... So I guess you could replace this next question. You could replace the word salmon with the earth, but, like, what do you think the future of our salmon is? Are you optimistic that the world of humans and the world of salmon can coexist, and nature and humans will find a way to figure things out?
Well, you know, optimism is a matter of temperament, and I tend to be optimistic in general. But we have to do a lot, and we have to do it fast. Climate change. We haven't really talked about climate change, but climate change is maybe the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide loves water, and something like a third of the carbon dioxide that's produced on land ends up in the ocean.
Yeah.
And it changes the hydrogen content so that it inhibits the growth of zooplankton and small fish like capelin, so that if you talk to people in the few fisheries left in New England, like the Penobscot or in maritime Canada or in Europe, they will tell you that their returns aren't good, that less and less fish that go out to sea are returning to the river.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that they don't make it because they're not finding enough to eat in the ocean.
Right.
The ocean is losing its carrying capacity, its ability to feed the animals that live there.
Right.
That is the scariest thing I've ever learned.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
If the oceans cannot feed the fish, we are really in trouble.
Yeah. And what a daunting task. Like, how do we even begin to understand how to fix that?
Well, these days I've been thinking, I look at the way people are reacting to this virus,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, why haven't we been able to get this level of concern about climate change? Because I'll tell you, climate change will get to the point where it's much worse than this.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't been able to get people to react to it.
Yeah. I wonder why that is. Is it because it's more of this sort of, people feel like less connected to it? Oh, someone will figure it out.
That's it. That's exactly the reason.
Yeah, and because we're saying, that in 30 years we're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah.
But with the virus, we're saying you could die tomorrow.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. I think we've all been thinking the same thing, just in how people are reacting to climate change in this sort of way. Because we're all under self-isolation for weeks on end, but climate change, like you say, is just as bad. I mean, if not maybe a worse problem.
Right. I mean, suppose people were as scared about that.
Yeah.
And they said, because you think of what we're doing to our lives to deal with this problem.
Yeah.
And what would they do to reduce carbon emissions? So, I mean, Donald Trump, the guy who's telling us that the virus isn't really a problem, also tells us that climate change isn't a problem.
Exactly.
But the rest of us have to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah. But hey, it's over. Easter Sunday, it's over, according to Donald Trump. So
yes, yes, because as we all know, viruses follow the Christian calendar.
Absolutely,
they must.
Yeah, thank God for that.
Hey.
Well, hopefully, a lot of people who are under quarantine realize that there's, that because of this, that we are connected and start to realize that maybe climate change is a problem, because everything.
I wonder, I've been thinking about this a lot, about what kind of changes this is going to make to people's thinking. And, maybe it will make people more responsible and more cooperative. Or will it just make people more antisocial and less connected?
Yeah.
I haven't talked to anybody in days. I live in Manhattan.
Yeah. That's true.
Stuck talking with us.
Of all places.
Well, you can see I'm desperate.
Nice. Okay, Mark, we've got 5 more questions. It's a segment of the show called Mitchie's Fishies 5. We ask every guest these same 5 questions about fly fishing. So I'm going to ask them to you now. Take your time answering them. It's not like a buzzer beater thing. Just 5 more questions.
Cool.
So this first one is, what is your favorite fish and why? Probably pretty obvious, but
Well, I always struggle with favorites. I mean, I guess wild salmon is my favorite, but I really like halibut a lot.
Oh yeah.
And I like trout if you can ever get wild trout.
Yep.
You may have to do it yourself, but then there's that catch and release thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Number 2 is, if you could fish anywhere in the world right now, where would you go and why?
This is March, right?
We can assume that it's the best time of year to go fishing for that fish. So best time of year, anywhere you could go.
Usually in March, I fish the Big Wood River in Idaho.
Oh, nice.
Which I love. Okay. And the thing about winter fishing, and it's still real winter in the Rockies.
Yeah.
Where are you guys?
We're in Toronto.
Oh, you're in Toronto.
Yeah.
Well, in the Rockies, it's still real winter, and it's kind of cold. And as long as your line isn't freezing on the guide, you're okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, nobody's out there fishing but you.
Yeah.
And there's not much to eat in the high country, so the elk and moose are coming down to the river, and they come over for a visit. It's a great experience.
Oh man, yeah, that sounds amazing. Jeez, we've definitely got to get out west. I've never fished out west, but we're going to be making a trip out there soon.
Yeah. I mean, they're big wild rivers. Lewis and Clark were astounded because they, till they crossed the Continental Divide, they had only known eastern rivers, and eastern rivers are so tame compared to western rivers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was telling the guys that I'm looking to get my first double-handed and head over to the west.
First bait rod.
First bait rod.
Yeah. I use a spay rod sometime. I bought it in Scotland.
Oh, nice.
A guy in Inverness made it, but I learned it in Scotland from an Irish guy. He spent a couple hours teaching me to use it, and he knew that I was a writer. And after a couple of hours, he said, "You should write a book, 100 Ways to Never Catch a Salmon." But once I got the hang of it, I really liked it. You have a lot more power in casting than you do with a one-handed rod.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I did catch a salmon that day too.
Oh wow!
Oh, right on.
So,
And I realized that catching a salmon is not that common in Scotland, because at this point I knew a lot of people in Scotland because I was going to all the rivers and interviewing people. And I got all these emails the same day congratulating me on catching a salmon. So, I realized it's not an everyday thing.
Well, that's very nice. That's an awesome way to end that day then. Jeez, because I know it's probably pretty tough to get one. You said your first rod there was built by a guy in Inverness?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a really special rod.
Yeah. Well, it's that's where they build them. It's spay rods. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so number 3 is, and I know you said you struggle with favorites, but this one is, what is your favorite or best fishing memory? Anything that just bubbles up to mind when it comes to a time you spent on the water that was just exceptional.
Well, it's memories of commercial fishing come to me.
Right.
Just being out. God, I remember hand lining for cod off of Newfoundland.
Yep.
And you just get out there in the morning. That's the real North Atlantic.
Oh man.
Just beautiful being out there.
Oh God, I can imagine.
Pretty much any day you go fishing is a good day.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless you do it in Manhattan. I see a lot of people fishing in Manhattan, but I'm going to pass on that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, number 4 is, why do you fly fish? Why do you fly fish at all?
Well, my next book after this one is about fly fishing.
Oh, wicked.
Oh, right on.
And one of the things that I deal with is that question.
Yeah.
Which I had never really thought about before, but I forced myself to. And the first question is, why do I fish?
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was a little boy, I noticed there was this pond I used to sit by and read, and I noticed there were fish in the pond, and I went to the hardware store and I got a hook, and I caught some worms, and I took a string and a branch, and I fished for these little fish.
Yeah.
And I just have always had this impulse to catch fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really tell you why.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've always felt this impulse to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fly fishing, you get involved in nature at a level that is unlike any other fishing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you basically find yourself trying to think like the fish, to outthink the fish. John Steinbeck once said that anybody tries to outthink a fish and fails deserves what they get. But they're pretty smart.
Yeah.
And you're on their turf.
Exactly.
And so you find yourself thinking everything about the fish and the river and the way the river flows and the way the food goes and where the insects go. And so you were involved in nature at a level you aren't with any other kind of fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's the most demanding kind of fishing.
Yeah.
I remember once I was in this I was in this lodge in Alaska. I'd been out in these places where, there was no electricity or running water, and out in these little tin boats getting tossed around. And I was really exhausted, and I just checked in at this fancy fishing lodge, and I got a nice river. I got some chum, but at night there were these people who had been helicoptered to some special place, and they're talking about how they caught so many fish their arms were getting tired. And I was thinking, that's not fun.
Yeah.
It's fun is, when you're in Scotland and you spend all day and then you catch that one fish.
Yeah, the challenge of it. Exactly like you say, why fly fishing exists at all.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. Number 5, Mitchie's Fishies 5. What fly pattern represents you best and why? If you were a fly, what fly would you be?
Well, I have 2 answers to that: the real one and the romantic one.
Perfect.
The real one is I would be a midge.
Nice.
They're they're small and inoffensive, and trout love them.
Yeah.
Although if I wanted to be a classy fly, I would be a dry fly and not a wet fly.
Yeah.
But the fly that I'm intrigued with is the McGinty. Have you ever heard of a McGinty?
No, which fly is that?
You can't even buy them anymore. I don't think they exist anymore. I have some because I got a pattern and I tied them myself.
Okay.
Hemingway fished with McGinty's, and he mentions it in his writing. And Sun Also Rises, they fish with a McGinty. And a McGinty is an old-fashioned, a 19th century fly that imitated a dead bumblebee floating down the river.
Bumblebee, yeah, it looks like a bee.
There you go.
Yeah. That's cool. That's awesome.
And, so I've tied a bunch of them. I haven't tried them yet because I can't recall fishing anywhere where I saw bumblebees floating down the river. So I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah. Why would you be that fly?
Because it has some history.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right.
Such a cool pattern. Such a cool pattern.
Kind of looks like a bit of a blend with an Atlantic salmon fly, like as to how the wings kind of come out. Just kind of has that profile.
Right. Well, but it imitates a real bug.
Yeah.
Salmon flies are. I mean, that's the fun thing about salmon flies is they don't imitate anything. They're just complete whimsy.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose if I wanted to be a fly, I would want to be a 19th century salmon fly, one of those British things that, have 50 different exotic and now extinct bird feathers.
Yeah.
Nowadays, Atlantic salmon flies are really very lightly dressed, usually double hooked, but lightly dressed, some good color.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of anecdotal, what's working. We don't know why. I mean, we don't even know why a salmon, once salmon enter the river, they don't eat anymore.
Right.
So why are they biting at flies at all?
Mm-hmm.
We don't really
Who knows?
We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show to talk with us today. We super appreciate you chatting with us.
My pleasure. Enjoyed talking to you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark, also, where can people find your work and find this book, Salmon?
Well, you used to be able to find it in bookstores.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can get it online anywhere. Hopefully, bookstores will reopen and you can get them there. But for now, you have to get it online.
I'll post the link to that in the show notes as well so people can find it so they don't have to go outside to the bookstores in these strange times. But yeah, thanks again for coming on the show, Mark. It was really an honor getting a chance to talk.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Wicked.
Pleasure.
Okay, thanks so much, and take care.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Well, that was Mark. Mark, thanks for coming on the show. Yeah, check out his book, Salmon. It is extremely informative. He goes over everything.
It's more than just about salmon. It's like a history. It's like a world history. It's like about, when, like he said, like rivers being developed in England and Ireland, Japan, and of course, like the colonization and industrialization of our rivers here in North. Like it's a it's a big undertaking
It
in
is.
terms of like a project. And he also, like chapter 11 goes into a pretty deep history of fly fishing too. So like it's a lot of cool info in that book. Big time.
And it's super well written. It's not just like, fact on fact on fact. It's like, it's a story and a bit of, the way he romances each character, or, not like real character, but
the Fisher characters. Sure.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, he's an awesome writer, and he's lived a really interesting life for sure. Even just in like right off the top of that prologue, talking about how he went actually commercial salmon fishing and with these guys, and yeah, it's really cool. So definitely check the book out. I'll put it in the show notes. Give it a read. It's a good book to just kind of have to flip through when when you're looking for more information about salmon, maybe, and just want to learn a little bit more about salmon.
Definitely.
But check it out.
And it's going to be it was published by Patagonia.
Yeah,
which is
Patagonia
cool. So
hand in that.
Yeah, so I'm sure it'll be available at Patagonia stores and Patagonia online as well. Probably grab it from a bunch of different places.
Yeah, totally. Wow, what are you guys doing today? We're not fishing. Nice, you're working today, eh?
So you're working today, Mitch? What are you doing? What are you doing today?
I'm working today. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, ever since this isolation thing's been going on, it just seems like I just kind of work every day because it's like weekend. It's like, oh, it's the weekend. I don't want to work, but it's like, well, what else am I gonna do?
What else are you gonna do?
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
just sitting here, I may as well help out and do something. But what are you doing today, Aldo?
I'm gonna keep working on YouTubeifying our podcasts.
Nice. Yeah, so watch for that. You can listen to our podcast on YouTube soon. You got some quarantine cuisine cooking up today. What are you gonna be eating, baby?
Oh, today? Today it's like Bree and I, we kind of like have one date day still,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we might actually get some delivery today.
Nice. Chanticleer?
Yeah, baby.
Nice.
Yeah, get some steak frites. I've got some red wine I need to drink. I've got some 40 Creek.
Dude, that sounds like
gonna make some 40 Creek old fashions, I think.
Oh, I would love.
One?
Oh yeah, I love the copper pot, man. It's not even. I could use some right now. Can I come over? Oh, wait, no, I can't.
Can't come over.
No,
but you can watch Aldo drink.
FaceTime me later, and I'll just like drink in front of you.
Yeah.
Sounds so unhealthy. Like mentally.
Can I FaceTime you? Yeah. No, you and Bree want some together time. So
I have some scotch. Yellow. Do you have any scotch or anything?
I got nothing, man. Other than the 40 Creek, I got nothing.
You got nothing? I've got like 60 plus bottles of shit behind me.
I got some nice Bowmore 12. I'll drink that later. You can watch me, Yelma.
I've got some Balvenie. Mitchell.
Really?
Yeah.
We should have a scotch later or tomorrow. Let's have a scotch tomorrow. We should have a scotch party.
I've got the Balvenie 10.
Oh, nice. Perfect. Let's drink some scotch tomorrow. And maybe we'll
tie a fly?
Yeah, maybe we'll do a little YouTube video tomorrow. Do you want to?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like fun.
Okay. Wait, am I included?
No,
you're not. Sorry.
You don't have fly tying stuff. I mean, I guess you could watch and drink.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna be on it. You're gonna watch. You're gonna. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Let's talk about what we could do. But let's do a little YouTube video tomorrow. That'd be fun. Doesn't even have to be live. Okay. We'll just record it. That'd be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, shit, everybody. I hope everyone's keeping well. Strange times. Again, we're doing this every Sunday.
Yeah. So next Sunday too, there's gonna be another show coming out with another
Stephen
guest.
Brent.
Stephen Brent. It's gonna be good.
That'll be super
Who's
cool.
Stephen, Aldo? What's Stephen's deal?
Stephen is a sportscaster. He writes and broadcasts for Sportsnet. I know him as kind of like, I always turn to him. I'm a big Blue Jays fan.
Yeah.
So he does a lot of baseball. He does a lot of writing for every sport, but I read and listened to his newscast about the Blue Jays. And so for me, this is a pretty cool, nerdy moment because I'm a big fan of his. And he's a great fly angler. He used to come into Drift all the time, and he's a passionate Atlantic salmon angler, and he loves fishing the flats for salt. So Yilma, you and him will have a lot in common for sure.
He's got a nice soothing radio voice as well.
Yeah, he's got a nice baritone.
Yeah.
Very baritone-y.
That's good.
Like this.
Yeah, exactly.
If only we were in studio, but this is the best case scenario either way. So look for that show. It's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well,
okay, bye.
Thanks everybody for thanks everybody for listening to the show, and that's it for me, Mitch. Aldo.
Yeah, bye everybody.
Yelma.
Bye everyone. Excited to see you guys next week.
Okay, see you guys later.
Wait. Next week.
You can find all of SoFly's content at sofly.ca. On Instagram, we're at the SoFly Crew. You can reach us at thesoflycrew@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or concerns. On Facebook, we're SoFly, and our podcast is available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify.